Deep within the heart of eastern Pennsylvania, surrounded by hills and farmland, is the renowned Strasburg Railroad. This famous short line provides tourists with a 45-minute round trip between East Strasbourg and Paradise, through beautiful Amish countryside, with motive power provided by one of 3 beautifully restored steam locomotives from the early 20th century. Today, however, we present to you a special event that goes above and beyond the regularly scheduled passenger trains. From the 27th to the 30th of September, the Strasburg Railroad became the venue for the reunion of 2 vastly different locomotives of the same heritage. The first, a newcomer, is 611, the last of the 14 J-class Northerns in existence, owned by the Virginia Transportation Museum and maintained by the Fire Up 611 organization. The second, a resident of Strasbourg, is the 475. This 12-wheeler is the oldest locomotive on the line and is the engine most often seen in use here. Join us as we witness these magnificent machines operating together for the first time since the end of steam on the Norfolk and Western in 611 and 475, a reunion of steam. We begin our adventure with 611 as she prepares to take her first train of the day. 611 is a J-class 484 type locomotive, built by the Norfolk and Western's Roanoke shops in 1950. The Big Northern was used on many of the N&W's famous passenger trains, including the Powhatan Arrow, the Pocahontas, and the Cavalier. 611 operated until 1959, when she was saved from scrap and donated to her city of birth for preservation at the Virginia Museum of Transportation. Her rise to popularity came in about 1982, when she was fully restored to operating condition to pull excursions on the Norfolk Southern steam program. 611 remained an icon of the program for its remaining 12 years of operation, and she saw service with such other steam stars as Nickel Plate 765, Southern 4501, and Norfolk and Western 1218. Her fire was dropped in December of '94, when the steam program was discontinued due to increasing expenses and limitations. 20 years later, she was given another chance, and is now once again pulling excursions along the eastern half of the United States. Today, as compared to her typical mainline fan trips, 611 is given a much simpler task of pulling the half-hourly trains along the Strasburg line. 611's train consists of 8 beautifully restored wooden passenger cars, including the Hello Dolly open car and the recently restored B&O lounge car Lynn W. Modinger. The 9th car bringing up the rear is the steel heavyweight business car, the Reading. The train nears the first crossing, adjacent to the Red Caboose Motel. Even this early on in the day, hundreds of people gathered trackside to see the legendary streamliner. .611 was restored in 2015 for operation on the Norfolk Southern's 21st Century Steam Program, which began operations 4 years prior with other heritage steam locomotives. Despite the program's cancellation the same year of her return, .611 continued pulling excursions over the NS system for another 2 years, selling out and drawing crowds of thousands each time. However, the trackage on which she could run was more limited than ever. Many more restrictions on the equipment and schedules were put into place, and over time, the general public grew bored of the trips being in the same venue again and again. Fire Up .611 and the VMT began looking into more places to run the locomotive, and even planned to run her on Amtrak routes. But new policies from Amtrak regarding excursions caused these plans to fall through. The Queen of Steam's only mainline trip in 2018 were ferry moves to and from Spencer, North Carolina, where she pulled short tourist trains and participated in photo charters on the museum grounds in September. At the end of the month, she returned to her home in Roanoke. Many people thought that this was to be her final run, unaware of what the future held. The reunion of steam events on the Strasburg Railroad, announced in March of this year, allowed not only .611 another chance to operate, but also for a new group of people to come and see her in action. After coasting past Groff's Grove, the train comes to a stop just before the crossing at Carpenter's to hear the whistle from the ghost of old locomotive number 6.
Echo. Did somebody say echo? No, folks, that's no echo.
We are truly in the heart of Amish country. Many farmers still use teams of horses to plow their fields and pull buggies to get from place to place. The train reaches Lehman Place, Pennsylvania, where the Strasburg line meets the Amtrak's Keystone Corridor. Although we didn't see any trains on the main line, the Keystone Corridor is active, and both Norfolk Southern and Amtrak operate trains over the line every day. .611 coasts to a stop on the Lehman Place siding and prepares to run around her train after being uncoupled. She arrived at Strasbourg on August 21st, in tow behind a pair of Norfolk Southern GP 38-2s. Although the NS hasn't hosted a steam excursion in nearly 2 years, they are a major ally to .611's owners, and we are grateful to them for assisting the locomotive on her nearly 400-mile journey from Roanoke, Virginia to Paradise, Pennsylvania. Pulling out of Lehman Place, we begin to retrace our steps back to East Strasbourg. In addition to the tourist trains, the line does maintain operation of revenue freight, including grain, lumber, and machinery. The cars are loaded in the yard and dropped off on a siding for NS locomotives to pick up. Others are brought to the yard to have their cargo transferred into trucks.
I said he's not as bad as me, though. You can tell the kids that there's maybe, I've got to work after this. I know. I heard you say that. I don't have.
We get another glimpse of the beautiful countryside that surrounds the tracks throughout. The area is rich with farmland, some of which, as you saw, is still plowed by teams of Amish horses. The railroad is fun to visit at any time, but the best days to go are the ones where two trains are running. We meet the hourly train at Groff's Grove, behind the other former N&W locomotive, number 475. The 480 was built in 1906 by the Baldwin Locomotive Works, and saw action on coal and mixed manifest services, and later branch line trains. Since 1993, she has been a crucial member of Strasbourg's vintage steam fleet. 475 underwent a swift overhaul prior to the reunion, now sporting her 1950s look for the first time in preservation. This includes the shunter-style pilot and, of course, the centered headlamp. After a peaceful 45-minute journey, we arrive back in the Strasbourg yard, getting a glimpse of the vintage equipment, including 611's tool car. Also present is former New York Central SW8 number 8618, which is primarily used in freight and switching use, and former Great Western number 90, a 210O built by Baldwin in 1924. 90 is the largest and most powerful resident on the Strasburg Railroad. Passing the engine house, our journey comes to an end, and the train coasts to a stop by the platform. It's time to go trackside and watch 611 and 475 take charge of the hourly and half-hourly services. Our first stop is Cherry Hill, where the two trains meet. We had two cameras operating, but unfortunately only one of the cameras captured the scene, and said camera's sound recorder was not set up properly. But we were able to fully capture the tail end of 611's train pulling into the siding, and 475's epic departure. Half a mile down the track, we set up at Carpenter's, off Black Horse Road, where 611 noisily advances towards the crossing. .611 highballs through Groundhog Cut. Onlookers scramble to get a good look. Once more, crowds gather to see the visiting steam locomotive as she passes the Red Caboose Motel tender first. We remain at this location for the next few scenes, watching as both locomotives trek up and down the line. An Amish buggy races to beat the train as 475 nears Paradise Lane Crossing, putting on a grand show as always. We return to Carpenter's to see the 3 o'clock service. This train is 475's last for the day. At the same location, we see 611, now the sole star of the day, easing towards the crossing. '8618 heads westbound from Paradise ahead of 611, after sorting some freight cars to be picked up by Norfolk Southern. A few minutes later, the Queen herself peeks around the tree-lined bank and runs on by in grand fashion. The 611 had been assigned with 4 half-hour trains on Sunday, September 29th. Each was scheduled 2 hours apart, with cab tours and whistle blows in between. However, due to the popularity of the locomotive and each train selling out very early on, a 5th train was scheduled for 5:30 in the evening. The sun is setting as we set up in a field for our final run-by, just across the street from the Red Caboose Motel. Meanwhile, an ultralight plane takes to the sky, circling around near the tracks, almost as if he were escorting the 611 back to the depot. "611 will stay at Strasbourg for the remainder of October to take part in more regularly scheduled services, special photo charters, and a variety of other festivities. At the end of the month, she will head to Spencer, North Carolina, for the rest of the year and into the spring of 2020, before returning to Roanoke once again. We would like to thank the Virginia Museum of Transportation, the Fire Up 611 organization, Norfolk Southern Corporation, and the Strasburg Railroad for making this historic event possible, and we can't wait to see what is in store for this magnificent locomotive. We hope you've enjoyed 611 and 475, a reunion of steam.